When Earth was first invited to the Galactic Council, it felt like a dream finally realized. For generations, humanity had looked up at the stars with wonder, imagining distant worlds and endless possibilities. Now the stars had answered. 1,000 alien species, some ancient beyond imagination, welcomed humanity with grand speeches, flowing banners, and promises of unity. Earth's leaders stepped into the shining halls of the Council with pride. Humanity had overcome wars, disasters, and centuries of division to stand among the stars as one. They wore their survival like a crown. They thought they had found kindred spirits beyond the void, civilizations who would respect them for the fire that refused to die in their souls. But the Council had other ideas. Behind the polished marble floors and glittering towers, the old empires whispered among themselves. Humanity's history was a warning to them. In just a few thousand years, Earth had gone from tribal camps to planetary rule, from stone tools to nuclear fire, from horseback messengers to faster-than-light travel. That speed, that hunger to reach beyond limits, terrified them. The Council had seen what humanity could do with almost nothing. They could not imagine what humanity would become with access to the galaxy's full wealth. And so the welcoming hand was offered, but the other hand built a cage. Rules were quietly passed. Treaties were written in complex languages full of hidden traps. Earth's ships were given restricted flight zones. Colonies were monitored for safety. Trade deals blew Earth dry before they could even take root. And the Council's courts, supposedly fair and just, always found ways to delay or deny humanity's appeals. At first, Earth tried diplomacy. Ambassadors worked tirelessly, believing patience and respect would win the galaxy's trust. For a while, it seemed like progress was being made. A few smaller species even began to warm to humanity's passionate spirit and unshakable determination. But the great powers, the old ones who had ruled the stars for millennia, watched with cold, calculating eyes. They did not want another rival rising among them, especially not one as unpredictable, as stubborn, as dangerous as humanity. Earth's leaders soon realized they had not been invited into a brotherhood. They had been invited into a cage, a beautiful one built from ancient fears. The Council smiled as it tightened the bars, believing that humanity would quietly fade into obedience like so many others had before. But they had forgotten something critical, something written into every human heart by centuries of survival, struggle, and rebellion. Chains placed on humanity would never hold forever. The day was coming when the Council's golden cage would be shattered, not out of hatred, but out of the unbreakable will to be free. And when that day arrived, the galaxy would remember why it should have welcomed Earth with honest friendship, because facing humanity's fury would be far worse than facing their friendship ever could have been. The summit at Velos Prime was meant to be a celebration. Dignitaries from across the galaxy filled the grand halls of the Crystal Spire, a glittering tower of light that touched the clouds. Music from a dozen worlds filled the air, and holographic banners danced with symbols of unity and peace. For humanity, this was supposed to be a turning point. Ambassador Mara Tren, Earth's finest diplomat, had been preparing for months. She believed that at last, humanity would be given full standing within the Galactic Council. No more restrictions, no more carefully disguised chains. A future of true equality seemed within reach. But the Council had other plans. As Mara stepped onto the central stage, dressed in the formal black and silver of Earth's delegation, a hush fell over the crowd. High Chancellor Varex of the Falshuri Dominion, a being older than humanity's recorded history, rose to speak. What followed was not a speech of welcome, it was a public shaming. Before the assembled races, Varex accused humanity of being reckless, violent, and primitive. He spoke of Earth's wars, its environmental disasters, its history of conquest and rebellion. He described humanity as a barbarian child playing with fire, dangerous to itself and to others. The crowd watched in cold silence as the insults rained down. Mara Tren stood motionless, her hands clenched at her sides. Every word cut deep, but she would not show weakness. Her training demanded calm. Her heart, however, was a storm. When Varex finished, there was no offer of full council rights. Instead, new sanctions were announced. Earth's trade privileges would be further restricted. Colonies beyond Sol's reach would be placed under protective oversight. Human expansion would be frozen indefinitely. It was a message as clear as any declaration of war. Humanity was not welcome, not as equals, not ever. The insult was calculated, meant to humiliate Earth in front of the galaxy. The Council believed that by breaking humanity's spirit, they would secure their control for centuries to come. But they miscalculated. As the news of the summit spread across human space, it ignited a reaction no one in the Council could have predicted. On Earth, in the colonies of Mars and Europa, in the sprawling habitats orbiting distant suns, humanity did not weep or beg. They remembered. They remembered every time they had been underestimated, every time they had been knocked down and told to stay down, every time they had fought, clawed, and bled their way forward when the universe said no. Mara Tren returned to Earth not in disgrace, but as a symbol. Her silent endurance in the face of public humiliation became the spark that lit a fire no council decree could extinguish. The council had intended to break humanity's will. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a quiet, burning resolve that would soon shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The broadcast of the summit insult spread like wildfire. Every corner of human space, from the bustling cities on Earth to the silent, icy outposts on Titan, felt the weight of the words spoken at Velo's prime. But what the Council didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that humanity had never been one to simply accept its place in the universe. It wasn't in their nature. Not anymore. As the news reached Earth, it was met with disbelief. Anger simmered just beneath the surface, but the real fire began when the leaders of Earth gathered in secret. Political figures, military strategists, and former war heroes all convened to decide humanity's next move. The air was thick with tension, the weight of history pressing down on them. Could they go back to diplomacy? Could they ignore the slap in the face that had been delivered? The answer was clear before the meeting had even begun. "We do not bend," said General Callan, a decorated war hero who had once fought in the brutal space wars against the Xantar rebels. His voice was low, but resolute. "We have faced worse than this. We will face worse than this again, but we do not bend." The others nodded. There was no hesitation. Humanity's history was a tapestry of survival against the odds, a history written in blood and sacrifice. They had risen from the ashes of war, poverty, and despair, and they would rise from this too. "Never again," said Ambassador Mara Tren, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 years of struggle. "Never again will we allow ourselves to be humiliated, dismissed, or controlled. Not by the Council, not by anyone." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. The decision was made in that instant. It was a vow, an unspoken oath shared by every human present. A line had been crossed. The galaxy had just learned that humanity's patience had its limits, and those limits had been reached. Across human space, the message was simple. It spread in whispers and encrypted messages in every language spoken on Earth and beyond. Never again. It was a call to arms, not for conquest, not for domination, but for respect. Humanity would not allow its future to be dictated by ancient empires, by bureaucrats who thought they could break them. Instead, they would demand their place at the table on their own terms. In the weeks that followed, the changes were subtle, yet undeniable. Research labs, once focused on peace and progress, now turned their attention to more practical matters. The military, once a relic of Earth's turbulent past, was rebuilt, not to fight a war, but to win it. Quietly, advanced technologies were rolled out, faster than light drives, weapons capable of disassembling entire fleets with precision, and shipyards constructed in the depths of space. Earth was no longer standing still, waiting for permission to be part of the galaxy. Humanity was moving forward, no matter what the Council thought. The Council's blunder had not been just a diplomatic failure. It had been the spark that ignited something far greater: humanity's realization that it no longer needed the approval of the old powers. They were not just part of the galaxy now, they were its future. The question was no longer if humanity would rise. The question was how soon. The weeks that followed humanity's decision to never again bow to the Council were marked by an eerie stillness. The galaxy buzzed with rumors of unrest on Earth. The Council watched from their high seats, amused at what they thought was a mere outburst, a brief flare of indignation from a species they still considered young and naive. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Behind the scenes, Earth was transforming. At first glance, the streets of its cities remained bustling, the hum of everyday life unchanged. But under the surface, something was stirring. In the quiet corners of military bases, deep within underground research facilities, and on private stations orbiting Mars, humanity was quietly preparing for something monumental. They weren't just preparing to defend themselves, they were preparing to strike first. Top scientists, engineers, and military leaders worked with a singular purpose. The peaceful research projects of old, clean energy, medical advancements, interstellar communication, were abandoned in favor of more practical applications. The brightest minds of Earth were tasked with bending the laws of nature, creating weapons that could break the power of any fleet the Council could send. The first of these projects was a new type of drive, a faster-than-light engine that could move entire fleets with unparalleled speed and precision. For years, it had been theoretical, an impossible dream. But now, necessity turned that dream into reality. Quietly, fleets of new ships, sleek, black, and silent, began to take shape in the depths of Earth's orbital docks. It wasn't just ships that were being built. Earth's industries, long focused on consumer goods and peaceful exploration, shifted gears. Weapons capable of disabling entire fleets with pinpoint accuracy were produced in secret. These weren't weapons of destruction, but weapons of precision, designed to cripple rather than annihilate. They would break the Council's hold without spilling blood. At least that was the plan. As the construction progressed, the political leaders of Earth worked just as tirelessly. Backdoor negotiations, hidden meetings with potential allies, and the quiet spread of influence began to take root across the galaxy. Humanity knew they could not go it alone. They needed support even from those who had once doubted them. The smaller species, those who had suffered under the Council's arrogance for centuries, began to listen. Messages of defiance, of hope, trickled through the galaxy's back channels. Alien worlds, once silent, began to make contact. They wanted to know, would Earth truly stand against the Council? Would they lead the charge against an empire of ancient rulers who had for so long ruled the stars with an iron fist? It was in the shadows, where humanity's true power had always thrived, that the storm was forged. There was no grand declaration, no speeches made to rally the masses. Instead, Earth's leaders knew that the time for words was over. The time for action had come. The Council may have believed that they were still in control, that humanity was nothing more than a temporary annoyance. But they had no idea what was coming. And when it came, it would be swift, silent, and impossible to stop. Humanity was no longer just preparing for war. They were preparing for justice. And in the depths of the galaxy, the Council would soon realize the price of their arrogance. The first strike came without warning, like a bolt of lightning splitting the darkness of space. Humanity's fleets, built in secret and honed in silence, moved swiftly and with deadly precision. The Council had no time to react. At the edge of the Varnuf system, a small but vital communication hub was wiped from existence in a matter of minutes. The operation was flawless. Silent ships, cloaked in the depths of space, dropped from sublight speeds to emerge above the planet before any defense could be mobilized. In a blink, the relay stations, critical for the Council's communication, were disabled. The entire system went dark. The news spread quickly, but the Council remained in the dark about who had struck. It wasn't until the second strike, just hours later, that they realized the truth. Another critical hub, this time in the Hilter system, was hit. Like the first, it was a surgical strike, No civilian casualties, no signs of war. Just clean, effective damage. It was clear. This wasn't a random act of aggression. It was a message. By the time the third strike hit, the Council's military high command was in full panic. Entire fleets were sent out to hunt down the perpetrators, but humanity's ships were like shadows in the void. They struck without warning and vanished, leaving nothing behind but confusion and devastation. In every strike, there was no waste of resources. There was no pointless destruction, just exact, crippling precision. The Council had underestimated humanity's resolve. They thought they were dealing with a species still trapped in the infancy of interstellar politics, but they were facing something else entirely, a force that had learned the hard way how to survive, and now how to strike. The Council's first response was swift, but it was also flawed. A full armada was sent to capture the perpetrators of the attacks, but they did not know who they were hunting. Humanity's ships were too fast, too elusive. They never fought head-to-head. Instead, they slipped past defensive lines, hitting critical targets and retreating before the Council's military could mobilize. Each strike shattered their sense of control, one by one. By the fifth strike, the Council was scrambling. Alien fleets, once proud and powerful, had fallen to pieces, disbanded by an enemy that could not be touched. The Council's sense of invulnerability had been shattered. No longer were they the untouchable rulers of the galaxy. No longer were they the ones calling the shots. The strikes had a single, clear objective: to show the galaxy that humanity was no longer the weak, dependent species they had once been. They had not fired a single shot of aggression, not yet. But the message was undeniable. Humanity had struck first, and they had struck with the fury of a species that would never again accept the yoke of submission. The galaxy was waking up to a terrifying truth. The Council was not the true power among the stars. Humanity was, and when they decided to make their move, they would do so on their terms. The Council had always believed that strength came from sheer numbers and ancient technologies. For centuries, their fleets had ruled the stars by force and fear. But against humanity's new tactics, those strengths became weaknesses. It was no longer about who had the largest fleet or the biggest cannons. It was about speed, precision, and the unbreakable will to win. Earth's commanders understood something the Council had forgotten. Wars were not won by brute force alone. They were won by intelligence, adaptability, and an unwavering spirit. Humanity's fleets moved like whispers across the stars, striking at supply lines, disabling shield generators, and severing vital communication nodes before slipping away into the dark. Every move was calculated, every attack measured for maximum impact. It wasn't long before Council-controlled territories began to crumble. Systems once tightly bound to the Council through fear and dependence now found themselves isolated and vulnerable. With supply lines severed and fleets scattered, panic set in. Worlds that had never dared to raise their voices against the Council suddenly found courage in the chaos. Rebellion sparked like wildfires across dozens of systems. Humanity had not asked them to fight, but by striking first and showing it could be done, they had given the oppressed something more valuable than any weapon: hope. As resistance movements grew, humanity offered silent support. They shared knowledge, technology, and strategies, but never claimed the glory. These victories belonged to the people of those worlds. Humanity wanted the galaxy to rise up on its own, fueled by its own anger and thirst for freedom. Meanwhile, Earth's fleets began to focus on larger targets. Key Council shipyards, which had once produced the most powerful warships in the galaxy, became their next objective. The assault on the Selvar Forge, a massive orbital shipyard deep within Council space, was a turning point. The attack was swift and merciless. Humanity's ships appear out of nowhere, their faster-than-light drives allowing them to bypass traditional defenses. Using electromagnetic pulse weapons and advanced hacking systems, they disabled the shipyard's security in minutes. By the time the Council realized what was happening, it was already too late. Without firing a single missile at civilian sectors, humanity seized control of the forge. Hundreds of Council ships under construction were either destroyed or commandeered. The blow was catastrophic, not just to the Council's military strength, but to their image of invincibility. The galaxy watched in awe as the news spread. The once feared Council, guardians of the ancient order, were being dismantled piece by a species they had once treated like children. Back on Earth, in war rooms buried deep beneath mountains, the leaders of humanity studied the data pouring in. They did not celebrate. They did not gloat. This was not about revenge. It was about balance, about ensuring that no power would ever again rule the galaxy through fear and oppression. The tide had turned. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future, and they were winning. Cornered and desperate, the Galactic Council called for an emergency summit. The grand halls of Avalor Prime, once the seat of unimaginable power, now echoed with the whispers of fear. Representatives from every surviving council race gathered under the Great Dome, their once proud banners now hanging limp. The room smelled of desperation and defeat. The councilors argued, their voices rising in panic. Some demanded unconditional surrender. Others clung to dreams of a counterattack, foolishly believing that enough ships and enough sacrifice could still crush humanity's uprising. But deep down, they all knew the truth. The Council's reign was over. The galaxy had changed, and there was no going back. Even as they debated, humanity was already moving. While the Council bickered, Earth's forces gathered in silent, calculated preparation. They had studied the Council's stronghold with relentless precision. Every weakness, every blind spot, every outdated defense was cataloged and exploited. At the center of it all stood Admiral Elias Vance, the mastermind of humanity's campaign. Calm, composed, and mercilessly efficient, he issued his final orders. The goal was not annihilation. It was to end the war so completely that no one would ever dare repeat the Council's mistakes. The attack began with a precision unseen in any war before. Humanity's fleets emerged from subspace, not in a messy, scattered arrival, but in perfect formation, encircling Avalor Prime before the Council's sensors could even finish sounding the alarm. The Council's defensive fleets, battered and disorganized, rushed to respond, but they were no match. Earth's ships were faster, sleeker, and crewed by soldiers who had been forged through years of hardship. They maneuvered around the sluggish Council vessels, cutting through their lines with cold efficiency. Key command ships were disabled in targeted strikes. Weapons arrays were crippled before they could even fire. Inside the Council chamber, chaos erupted. As news of the assault poured in, councilors fled their seats. Some tried to contact their fleets, only to find static in their comms. Others simply collapsed in despair, knowing it was too late. But humanity was not there to massacre. Instead, a broadcast went out across every channel, reaching every corner of the galaxy. It was Admiral Vance himself, standing firm in his uniform, his voice steady and commanding. He spoke not of conquest, but of justice, not of revenge, but of balance. He declared that the era of domination by the few over the many was over. The Council's time had passed. From now on, every world, every species would have a voice. No more forced servitude, no more oppression. The galaxy would rebuild free and united. The Council had no choice but to surrender. There would be no negotiating table, no special terms, only the end of their tyranny. As the Council members were taken into custody, the people of Avalor Prime watched in stunned silence. They had expected fire and blood. Instead, they saw something far more powerful, the rise of a new order, led not by fear, but by the relentless fury and unbreakable will of humanity. With the Council's banners torn down and their leaders detained, the galaxy held its breath. For centuries, the people of distant worlds had only known rule through fear, believing true freedom was nothing more than a myth. Now, that myth stood before them as reality, carried on the shoulders of humanity. Earth did not proclaim itself the new ruler. Instead, they invited every liberated world to Avalor Prime, not as subjects, but as equals. Across the once imposing Council grounds, temporary shelters were built where delegates from every race, every culture, could meet. No grand thrones, no towering displays of dominance, just simple open spaces where true dialogue could begin. Humanity led by example. They refused to take more than one seat among the assembly, despite having earned the right to rule if they wished. Admiral Vance himself declined any offers of absolute authority, choosing instead to help lay the foundation for a united galactic alliance, one that would protect, not oppress. In the early days, mistrust ran high. Old wounds from the Council's era were slow to heal, but humanity's actions spoke louder than any words. They offered technology freely, helped rebuild shattered economies, and stationed their fleets only where invited. They dismantled the Council's most terrifying weapons, showing the galaxy that strength was not about domination, but about responsibility. One by one, the worlds responded. From the frozen moons of Tarsus to the deep jungles of Velkar, from the desert cities of Xenart to the floating cities of Malur, voices rose, not in fear, but in hope. New treaties were signed, old rivalries set aside. The galactic map, once carved into territories of control, began to blur into a web of cooperation. Humanity's fury had burned down the old world, but from the ashes rose something stronger. A brotherhood of worlds, a council not of tyrants but of peers. For the first time in living memory, the stars seemed brighter. Trade routes reopened. Cultural exchanges flourished. Scientists from a dozen species collaborated on projects that had once been forbidden. Artists, musicians, scholars all found new inspiration in this fragile, blossoming peace. And through it all, humanity remained vigilant. They remembered too well how easily power could corrupt. Earth's fleets patrolled not as conquerors, but as guardians, ensuring that no new power could rise to replace the old tyranny. They taught others how to defend themselves, how to govern with fairness, and most importantly, how to never forget the price of freedom. Generations would pass. Children would grow up hearing stories of the time when the council fell, and of the strange, determined species from a small blue world who had changed the course of history. In the end, it wasn't humanity's strength or technology that saved the galaxy. It was something far rarer, an unyielding belief that even the darkest night can end, and that even the most broken galaxy can be healed. It was the fury of humanity that broke the chains. It was the heart of humanity that built a new dawn.